Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast and YouTube channel focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan and you're listening to our Threat Guide series where we cover your opponent's factions and give you the knowledge to defeat them. The episodes will cover their strengths, their weaknesses, any gotchas they might have, as well as giving you some suggested tactics and counters to defeat them. With all things Kill Team, there are no certainties. So you'll have to take this as a reference and adapt your tactics to you, your team, the terrain, and the mission. Before we begin, I want to give a massive shout out to my patrons. You guys are incredible and I hugely appreciate the support you give me. If you too are interested in supporting the channel, there's a few ways you can go about doing so. Firstly, you too can become a patron, where you'll get access to the Discord, patron priority questions, early access to content, some exclusive content, as well as tournament rewards. This really is the best way to support the channel, and we try our hardest to support the patrons as much as we can. Secondly, if you find yourself buying Kill Team goodies or hobby supplies, you can use one of our affiliate links. This means that with every purchase you make, a little bit comes to the channel. It'll cost you nothing, but it'll help us keep the show going. We have affiliate links with Element Games in the UK or Noble Knight Games in the US. Finally, you can always support for free without spending a penny. It's as simple as hitting subscribe, liking the video, and sharing amongst your local community. Telling your friends about us is a great way to connect the communities and help elevate everyone's game. We're keen to hear your thoughts and feedback, so don't leave that comment box empty. Let us know what you think. Maybe we missed something, or maybe you have a better strategy. Drop a comment and let us know. Once again, thank you for your support, and with all that said, let's get into it. On this episode of Threat Guide, we're talking about the big boys in green. It's the Orcs. Orcs are renowned for their crude humour and love of violence. Sounds like they'll fit right into Turning Point 5. So let's talk about the Commando kill team and what it brings to the table. This 11 operative kill team has 104 wounds, an average 5+ save, average weapon skill of 3+, a ballistic skill of 4+, and 11 activations. So let's get straight into their strengths, and firstly starting with their durability. Those 104 wounds take a while to chew through. With Orcs having 10 wounds apiece, it puts them at a great breakpoint to avoid most of the 4 damage weaponry that exists in the game. You need something like Plasma or Melter to really put this thing down, but then they have a benefit for that. Just a scratch. For 1 CP they can avoid the damage from a single dice, no matter how much you hit them with, critical hit or not. Commando players are all good lads though, so definitely won't use against you every single turning point, even if you complete your runes in front of the game. Next, this team has insane board presence, able to forward deploy with a sneaky git ploy, and able to conduct a scouting phase dash, as well as a team-wide strategic phase dash. You can find yourself with a whole bunch of green bodies already in the midfield. Ordinarily this wouldn't be too much of a problem, but the Commando's faction ability is Throat Slitters. This lets them perform charges whilst on conceal, so every single commando can be a threat on Turning Point 1. Another key strength of this team is their ability to play the mission, especially loot. The forward deploy, combined with the Nob's 3 APL ability, or the Comms Boy's free mission action, means they can contest an objective whilst looting other objectives. Luckily, this was recently nerfed, meaning they can only now contest one objective at a time, but they're still able to rush objectives and get that easy VP on Turning Point 1. Another key strength of this team is its effective 2 methods of comms. The Commando Nob can be handing out APL, as well as the Comms Boy. Most comms have the issue of being ineffective with their APL, but the Commando Comms Boy has a free mission action, so he's able to move around, hand out APL, and play the mission concurrently. And this is exactly the same as the Commando Nob. He can either buff himself, or buff others nearby him. This APL manipulation makes Commandos also good at playing secure and the capture missions, able to respond with APL where they need it and when they need it across the board. Next, let's talk about Into the Dark and how this benefits this team. With the Daka ploy, if you retain a crit, you can select one of your failed hits to retain a successful hit. This makes stick bombs and dynamite more effective, but their faction ability comes into its own here. Able to use their strategic phase dash, they can move their entire team up on conceal into hatchways, and then threaten each room with a charge from conceal. If you combine this with the sneaky git ploy, a model can make a normal move, and operate a hatch, and conduct a dash before the game begins. That means you can have a model 9 inches outside a deployment zone before the game's even started. This will usually be a Commando Nob, hiding behind another hatchway, looking for an early turn 1 charge and kill. Speaking of the Nob, he's a strength in his own, so to speak. With the ability to manipulate his own APL, he can play the mission whilst also putting out punishment, and he also happens to be one of the most durable models in the entire game. With 13 wounds and just a scratch, this guy can literally eat an entire plasma gun to the face and not die, and that's assuming you can get a shot off on him, because he can spend the entire game on conceal and still do everything he needs to. He's quite literally Kill Team's Hulk. Don't make him angry. You won't like him when he's angry. Commanders also have access to multiple ways of doing relentless shooting, either through the Daka Boy getting close range, or the Rocket Boy not moving before they fire. This makes the historically bad shooting Orcs surprisingly quite accurate and able to put out quite a bit of damage. And finally, don't sleep on the Commando Grot. He might be the smallest model on the team, but he comes with super conceal packed in. He's also able to slingshot around the board using his grappling hook ability and get to places you weren't necessarily expecting. This makes him ideal for mission play and for scoring tac ops. So let's talk weaknesses. Firstly, the majority of their melee operatives are only 4 attacks. This makes them somewhat unreliable in melee, especially as they have no inbuilt rerolls. Next, the entire team is on quite chunky 32mm bases. This can work for them, but also against them. It's easier to root block and enable your own movement of your own models through barricade placement. This can slow down the orcs and stop them getting around the board the way they want to. Additionally, they only have a 5+ save. This makes them quite susceptible to shooting damage, even without any AP. Next, the Commando player will have to be good at their CP budgeting. They'll likely want to use their sneaky git ploy to forward deploy, also their shush for the strategic phase dash, and then 4 just to scratch. Oh yeah, I was lying when I said they wouldn't use it every turning point. This only gives them 1 CP for a reroll or an alternative ploy, so they have to use it wisely. Next, the bomb squig has to remain on engage, and therefore has a potential to be shot as an early target. When it does, it could also blow up, dealing damage to those around it, so they have to be careful where they place the bomb squig and make sure they don't leave it in an area which can do damage to their own models. As a team, they have no ability to ignore injury or APL modifiers. This means injury can seriously tank their reliability, especially in melee. Injury auras can be particularly effective against this kind of team. Next, their relentless when they're shooting is good, but it's very conditional. They either have to be not moving, or they have to get within a certain range. It can be easy for players to play around this, and that again tanks the reliability of their long range shots. So let's move on and talk about their gotchas and what could catch you out. Firstly, just a scratch. This 1 CP ploy could ignore any amount of damage inflicted upon the model, and therefore is best used in melee. It becomes a weird super parry where you've wasted your entire dice and then they're ready to hit back, and they usually hit back quite hard. But they can choose an optimal time to use this to ensure they keep a model alive. Where possible, I'll prioritise just shooting first and draw out that just a scratch. This removes the possibility of them potentially killing you in your own activation during melee if you fail to account for it. Next, it's the super sneaky boy himself, it's the Grot. This model can give given a 3rd APL and then fly across the board and steal one of your objectives, or contest one of your objectives if it's a capture mission. You'll need to ensure you leave sufficient APL on your home objectives to avoid losing one by accident. But he can also do a turn 1 loot, where he flies across the board and picks up an objective right from in front of you. So let's talk about Dynamite. Slightly less prevalent after the recent nerf, it can't be used in Turning Point 1, but the standard play of giving it to the Breacher Boy for Turning Point 2 is there. Breacher Boy is able to move through terrain with 1-inch thickness as if it wasn't there. This gives him a potentially massive threat range if he's given an APL buff, as he can move 6 inches and throw dynamite anywhere within 6 inches. That's a 12-inch exclusion zone that you have to monitor. You can always hit him with an APL debuff though to remove this. So let's talk about Into the Dark. The dynamite nerf in the balanced data slate doesn't apply to Into the Dark. It's counted as a separate ploy, so they can still move up, change their order and throw it. And they can get quite a long way. They can do a normal move and with shush move a further 3 inches. That's 9 inches up the board before the game even begins, and that can be on a knob with 3 APL. But they can also do this without dynamite, so be aware of a model potentially being halfway at the board before the game begins and plan around it. Next, on open board, there are various ways they can play their sneaky git. They can place a sniper boy on a vantage point to get an early turn 1 assassination against a key model. Make sure you hide in one that's particularly crucial to your game plan. They can also use the knob or comms boy to play the mission and contest objectives. Or they can use something like the slasher boy to sit on an objective, contest it, and act as an area denial screen, killing anyone that gets within their 8-inch charge range. These Turning Point 1 threats have great synergy with their faction tac-op shock tactics, where they want to try and achieve a turn 1 kill and then hold more objectives than you during Turning Point 2. So where possible, look to deny them easy kills on Turning Point 1. Commander Knob is a great model for stealing objectives from you, and he can do that by giving himself 3 APL. You won't be able to see it coming, he'll just self-buff, move, dash, and steal an objective from beneath your feet. So to prepare for this, you might need to double stack operatives on objectives to stop them from being able to steal it from beneath you. The Sniper Boy has another trick up his sleeve. He can also use the Avit ability. This allows him to make shooting attacks against a group of operatives within 2 inches of the original target. It's like a halfway blast fusillade kind of thing. Speaking of shooting, the Daka ploy has a way of increasing the reliability quite significantly on ITD. Used with stick bombs and dynamite, it can retain a miss as a hit as long as they roll a crit, and with lethal 5 that becomes quite likely. So be aware of grouping up versus those blast threats. Commanders also have the ability to fight into the turning point. For 1 CP, they can use the Crumpum tactical ploy, so be careful trying to hide in melee against some of these guys. Finally, Commanders have access to smoke grenades. This is a great way for them to position for Turning Point 2 or move threats up the board. This can be used particularly well to allow a squig to move into the mid-board and be somewhat safe. They can throw a smoke grenade and then move and dash the squig into the smoke, ready to charge forward in Turning Point 2 and cause some havoc. So let's talk about counterplay and strategies for how you can defeat the Orc Commandos. Firstly, if you have the ability to forward deploy someone yourself, you can use that model to screen out their sneaky git ability. their commando can't deploy within 6 inches of any operative, and therefore you can stop them getting to heavy cover where they need to be. If you can't stop them setting up, you can at least stop them from using their shush strategic deploy to do a free strap phase dash. If you get within 6 inches, they can't use it. Next, you should be using your barricades to your advantage, route restricting or charge blocking where possible. Melee blocking barricades are optimal against this kind of team to avoid them being able to get in combat whilst remaining on conceal. Remember, they have a 32mm base, so therefore if your team has 25 or 28s, you can make these one-way advantages for yourself and deny your opponent free movement. Next, you need a good plan to get 3 objectives on turning point 1. These guys are going to rush forwards and try and steal as much as they can, so you need to make sure that you get some before they do. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to go 4-2 against Kommandos, as a combination of sneaky get forward deploy and free mission actions or 3 APL means they can reach almost all mid-board objectives before you can. Next, where possible, plan to fight orcs in melee only when they're injured. 4 attacks hitting on 4s becomes really swingy for them, as potentially you can kill them without taking too much return damage. As well, where possible, apply chip damage to make the break points in your favour. Always have in mind though, just a scratch and its ability to ruin that maths for you. If an orc charges you, it might be best just to parry to survive if they still have their just a scratch active. That's because they can avoid taking damage whilst continuing to hit you, and therefore it's like a super parry in itself where you've wasted an attack dice and they still have attack dice remaining. If you can burn out their attack dice first and then use your attack dice subsequently, it'll avoid you dying in melee. If your team has the ability to ignore obscurity, it can be really useful versus their smoke grenades. Being able to shut down any plays with smoke to get onto an objective or move a bomb squig into the midboard is really useful to deny their threat ranges. Next, let's talk about the Grot again. Always keep in mind where he might be and where he might go. You need to make sure you protect the home objectives. The last thing you want to do is move a model off and have him come across and steal your VP and make a large point swing towards the end of the game. If you have the option to kill him, it can be worth it. He dies pretty easy and it reduces that mental tax. When going up against the bomb squig, it's important to remember that the standard 2-inch spacing for blast doesn't apply. This guy has a 5-inch blast as it's 2 inches either side of his 1-inch base. Make sure to space correctly or use terrain blocking or barricade blocking to stop him being able to charge you or get within range to detonate. Finally, the main skill to defeat this team is learning to play around its just a scratch ability, either waiting out for your opponent to use it and then hitting them with the big damage, or forcing it out through shooting attacks before you deliver your melee damage. Often the only way to kill an orc is through massive overkill, so you still want to be using your AP, you still want to be using your high damage weapons, and you still want to be rerolling for additional hits. So, that concludes the briefing. What questions do you have? That brings us to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening. If you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated, and share this with your friends so they can benefit as well. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure to hit subscribe and select the bell icon so you get notifications as soon as the next episode drops. It really is the best way to help a small channel like ours. If you can't wait and you do want early access, you can join the Patreon, where you get exclusive access to all of our content ahead of time, as well as exclusive videos, access to the Discord, and tournament rewards. If you are an existing patron, let me take this moment once again to say a massive thank you for your support. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host Ryan, this has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next time.